This week I'm joined by Eddie Kelly to discuss his life within the GAA. Eddie played hurling and football for Wexford for many years in the 1960s and also for his club St Aidan's in Enniscorthy. Eddie, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Peter.
First of all, I suppose none of the big days in your career would have happened without the beginning. So where did the beginning of your life within the GAA start for you?
Well, the beginning of my life in the GAA started with the Christian Brothers. I was educated by the Christian Brothers in the mid-40s to the mid-50s. And initially, when I was a primary pupil in the Christian Brothers, football was the big thing. There was nothing very much hurling in Wexford because Wexford had been in the All-Ireland semi-final in the football in 1945, and all the school leagues were all football at that stage. And initially, my big interest in the GAA was playing football. That changed in 1951. As you know yourself, Wexford, we played Tipperary. We lost it, unfortunately, in 51. And it suddenly changed. Everything became hurling.
All the young lads
wanted to start hurling. And that was the initial involvement with the GAA. And another area, the GAA, was the less popular one, would be handball. There was a handball alley beside the GAA, beside the CBS Enniscorthy. It's not down now, but it was there for years. So we used to go down to that at lunchtime to play handball. And then that continued on. I'm a psychiatric nurse, worked in St. Senan's Hospital, and there was a handball alley there as well. So that gave me the interest in handball. So that was the start. That was the start of my interest in the three sports, you could say.
At club level, then, what was the first club you would have joined or been involved with?
At club level, I played with a club called the Boys Club. It was known as. There was social integration was just getting off the ground, and a priest in Enniscorthy, Father Scallon, started the Boys Club, and we all became members. And one of the big things, of course, was hurling. And there was a juvenile team and a minor team, and that's where my career started with and then it continued on with CBS Enniscorthy at secondary level. So there was no block in it. It continued on until I retired. So that was the big. And the Boys Club we went to a county final. We didn't win it, but there were if you want to call it winning medals a success, but they were a successful minor team. And following on from that, then when I became over the minor age, which was 18, I was selected for the Wexford junior hurling team, and we got to a Leinster final, and that continued on into my senior career on with St Aidan's of Enniscorthy.
And you would have maybe towards the end of St Aidan's days as a top team, you would have been involved in a couple of county final victories for them.
I would have been. St Aidan's won 4 in a row. I think it was 1956 to 1959. And I was involved with the last 2 of them. Now, St Aidan's were a very hard team to have your place on because in 1957, as I have already said, I was part of the Wexford junior hurling team and we got to a Leinster final. But I was only a substitute on the Aidan senior hurling team. I couldn't nail down a place.
It'd be a very unusual situation to be in, I suppose, wouldn't it, really?
Well, it would be unusual. You think if you represented your county, you might be an automatic choice for your club, but not with St Aidan's.
I think at the moment some of the St Martin's younger guys are having the same problem, I think. But
I suppose there's a measurement of success too. If a club is doing well, everyone wants to play, everyone is eager for their position, and it makes the club more successful.
St Aidan's, I suppose you could say, they were a slightly unusual club in the sense that there was sort of one team rather than a full club. Would that be fair to say?
That's a fair comment. St Aidan's were, I'd say, very unusual, Peter, more than slightly unusual. That they had no minor team, they had a token junior team, and their whole focus was around winning the Wexford Senior Hurling Championship. And I'm fairly sure this, I think between 1950 and 1960, in that 11-year period, they won it 9 times. So in terms of that kind of success, they were very successful. But in terms of, we hadn't our own ground, we trained in the showgrounds, we trained in various pitches around, but we had no home, if you want to call it, if you want to say that. But having said that, I enjoyed playing with St Aidan's, and they were and competition was fierce for places.
You also played with a team as part of your work in St Senan's Hospital. there was a team associated with the hospital at that time?
There was, yeah, St. Dibnus, which is associated with mental health. We were known as St. Dibnus, and people from all over Wexford came to work in St. Sennans. And we started a junior football team, and it was part of the most enjoyable part of my career that we won the county junior football championship. I think it was 1958. After trying for, actually I played with them before I became a psychiatric nurse because my dad worked there.
Right.
And I had played minor football for Wexford, and I was keen. I was always keen about football. A lot of people would tell you I was a far better footballer than I was hurler. Maybe that wouldn't be a hard thing, but that stimulated my interest in football, and we won the county junior football championship. And the following year, then we became a senior club, and St. Mary's we became known as then. We were beaten in the county final. We rejoined the St. Aidan's then hurling club, and known as the St. Mary's, played in another senior football final. Then the Starlights, my original football club, I played in 3 more county finals with them, and it's not a great record, but I lost 5 county senior football finals and didn't win any of them.
Well, I think maybe the couple of senior hurlings you won might have made up for
Well,
a little bit, maybe. But
yeah, and they would make, and I don't think it's a matter of making up either. There were years looking back now that I enjoyed tremendously. The ones I won, the ones I lost, the people I met, and the people I remained friends with them all. And you meet them in Wexford, you meet them in Gorey, you meet them in New Ross, you meet them everywhere.
The memories of it.
The memories are great. They're good.
The club situation in Enniscorthy in the 60s was a little bit sort of unclear as far as I can see for someone who wasn't around. What was the situation at the time?
The situation was that the senior hurling club in Enniscorthy was St. Aidan's. And as I've said before, they were very successful. They won 9 county championships in 9 years. Now that was grand for the people that were part of that. But there was a lot of other very, very good hurlers, people quite famous hurlers, Michael Collins, Larry Burns, the Sullivans, who weren't able to break into the Aidan setup. And they were good enough to hurl senior, and the Aidens hadn't a particular interest in junior hurling.
Right.
So they had nowhere to go. So then the Shamrocks GA club was formed. It was formed in a little hall there in the back way coming from the Shannon, and it was formed, and it was a very successful club. I think they won the senior championship. I'm not sure the year, could be
69.
69
50 years ago now this year.
So they were quite successful. They won intermediate, and a lot of their players played for Wexford. So they did fill that need. Now when the Shamrocks started, the Aidens, for some reason, well, the Nick O'Donnells and the Podge Keoghs and the Ted Morseys were coming towards the end of their careers. Now the Shamrocks were there, and they hadn't ready-made replacements for them. So the Shamrocks became successful. They won in 69, but after that end, the Enniscorthy team started doing really badly. Didn't contest. They had senior teams, but so had the Aidens. I continued playing with the Aidens, but we were always knocked out in the first or second round. So there was an initiative started, and the Rapparees GA club, and that was a join up between the St. Aidan's and the Shamrocks for hurling. The Starlights remained as the football part of it. And well, the Rapparees won some, but the St. Aidan's folded at that stage. There were no more, but the Shamrocks continued on.
Yeah.
And they are there
they're
today.
The Shamrocks team we have
they're
today.
the Shamrocks you have today, and the Rapparees are the team that the Rapparees are very successful. They're not winning, but at least they're in contention. They're in contention. So this is the setup in Enniscorthy.
They won senior in 78 shortly after that.
They did, yes.
I suppose so.
They did, and they had the facilities because they had Belfield.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
Well, they contested the semi-final this year. They didn't win.
Yeah, the last 3 years. So
yes, so but that's how the GA evolved
in Enniscorthy. Very interesting. I suppose a lot of our younger viewers, particularly, wouldn't have realised that that's where those clubs originated from. Or
no, it's when you started first. When I said I was a pupil in the CBS Enniscorthy in the mid 40s to the mid 50s, it's just tell you how far back we're going. Yeah.
you were part of the Wexford senior hurling panel then when Wexford won the All-Ireland in 1960. When did your breakthrough as a panel member come? When were you first called up to the squad?
I was actually called up to the squad in 1959. St. Aidan's won that senior hurling championship, and I became part of the Wexford senior hurling squad in 1959, and I was part of it. I was a substitute in the All-Ireland in 1960, and I always had a good bit of knee trouble. Probably in 1962 and 3, I didn't play any games.
Right.
And 64 as well. And then I was I started playing again then, and I was part of the Wexford squad in 1965. And I had to stop for a bit then, and I became a part of it again in 1967, which led on to the 1968. So I always enjoyed the game. I was kind of, if you weren't selected, it didn't bother me that. No, I'd like to be selected at times, but it didn't bother me or make me sour. So you could say maybe after 10 years for the 68 Holland, I secured in 67, I secured a permanent place on it. And I played then from 67 until I retired in 1969.
And just on the 1960 All-Ireland then would have been the first one you were involved with. It would have been fairly difficult, I suppose, to break onto both the St. Aidan's team and the Wexford team with someone like Nick O'Donnell as full-back in competition.
Well, it would have been, Peter. As everyone knows, Nico was on the team with a century, and there's not too many full-backs, and if you're looking for that position. But for St. Aidan's, I was always wing-back for them. And when I tried to break into the Wexford team first, I played in a lot of positions. I was selected as cornerback, never full-back hardly, except the practice game, and centre-back, and I was wing-back. And I played in the middle of the field when Gorey was opened, and I played full forward on a couple of occasions. Now, I was never a forward, it just happened that way, but I was never if I wasn't full back on my club team, I hardly could be full back, and it wasn't until
the late
64 or 5
yeah.
when Nico retired that I became a full back. And for that reason, that there was no one, not alone in Enniscorthy, but in Ireland, was going to displace Nico.
Yeah, it would have been a very difficult task, I'm sure.
It would have been.
So you mentioned then that you became more regular on the Wexford team in 1967, and that came along at the right time, really. And it led to you winning an All-Ireland as a player, full-back 1968.
Yeah, that came along at the right time, really. And again, there's a lot of things down to chance in your life. Michael Collins was the regular full-back, and coming up to a Leinster final, he was injured. And I was selected then as they were looking for a full-back, and I suppose I had a good bit of experience, and I was selected, and I played then regularly from 67 to 69. And ironically, when I was injured, Michael got his place back, and I think Wexford in the 70 All-Ireland, Michael was full back, and he regained his position. I had retired at that stage, and I'm not saying he wouldn't have regained it one way or the other. So there is a certain amount of luck in injuries and how good other people are and all that, you know. But I enjoyed the hurling. I never looked on it. I wasn't selected, or I should have been selected. When I was, I did my best, and when
you
I
weren't,
wasn't, I went to the game. And if I was a substitute, I enjoyed that too.
You kept trying anyway.
I kept trying.
I suppose for younger viewers, the All-Ireland Championship in 1968 and around that time was a much more condensed championship. I think Wexford only had 3 championship games that year. There was a Leinster semi-final, a Leinster final, and the All-Ireland final.
Yeah, it was a very condensed championship. But for all that, it might have been just as hard to win, because you have to play more games now. But at least if you lose now, you have a second opportunity.
To develop
I think
the team,
that's great. I'm in favour of most of the change in the GAA, because that time Wexford could have been drawn against Kilkenny in the first round of the Leinster Championship, and they often or not were All-Ireland champions, so you were gone.
Or at least one top team was gone straight away.
At least one top team was gone, and some of the games the Kilkenny beat us and the games we beat, there were only a point or two in it. There was nothing.
And that was the end of your season then?
That was the end of the season, and that was early in May. So I think the present system has a lot to offer in that regard. And obviously it has too, because you look at the crowds of people attending GA matches today and look at their age profile. There's a lot younger people, a younger age profile, looking at the games.
I
And that
suppose,
has to be good for the GAA.
well, they see their stars more often, and they're queuing up for autographs and they're queuing up for photographs.
They do, yes, they do. And of course, then television came in, and that was another attraction.
Just that you mentioned the television, for anyone wondering, on YouTube, the full game of the 1968 All-Ireland final is on YouTube, so if anyone wants to go and have a look at that, they can. It's a remarkable game. You were, how many points down at half-time, Eddie?
We were 8 points down at half-time, and it looked bad. But in terms of scores, I suppose we weren't as far back as it looked, because with all their superiority in the first half, Tipperary had scored 1-11. Well, now I know it's a fair score, but it's not a mighty score. So we started off and we got a few points and a goal. Well, that put us straight back. Into it. But I think one of the reasons there was two things about the 68 team that I think are a bit different to other Wexford teams. The training regimes had changed a lot. In the 60s, people work really hard. I'm not saying they're not working physically, I better be careful. They work really hard physically, lifting stuff, farmers, people working in factories. They were doing a lot of physical work. So I know it's weight training and that, but that hard physical work substituted for weight training. Now, for the first time ever in 1967, around October time, the Wexford panel was selected, and we trained hard in October, November, December, January, and we always had that bit of an edge in fitness, I thought, because I'm not quite sure other teams were doing it that early. Certainly the 65 Wexford team and the 60 Wexford team wouldn't have put the same amount of training in. It wasn't a done thing at the time.
Yeah, and what would the regime have consisted of? Would it have been 2 nights a week, or would it have been running?
It would have been 2 nights a week in the Saturday, and generally the floodlights weren't the big thing. You'd have a few bulbs up, and that was running and sprinting and that kind of, until the spring came along, and then the hurling skills developed. And again, then the training was different too, because we were trained by Ned Power. He was Kilkenny, and he was the teacher in St. Peter's. Now, he was a grand man, but it's like every teacher, I suppose, which you know a bit about yourself. That was kind of what he said, that's what we did. And there's no harm in that. There was a more organisation in it, and it was a big help to the team. And we all pulled together, which is unusual, because I'm not sure this, but I think there was 10 or 11 clubs. The players were drawn from all over the county, and we all pulled very well together. And that's important to a team as well, that a county team acts as a club team. And that was another big advantage to us.
What then was the normal match day preparation for an inter-county team at the time?
Hackney cars were things, they were taxis, but they were going by Hackney car. Bill O'Reilly, an undertaker in Enniscorthy, he always brought the Enniscorthy contingent. Tony Dorn and the lads went with someone else, I'm not sure. The Ferns lads went with someone else. The Rathnure people travelled with someone from Ross, and there was about 5 different Hackney cars picked us up, and we travelled. We didn't stay overnight before anywhere. You just went on the day wherever you were playing. And sometimes if you were playing in the league that time down in Cork, you had to go quite early. Roads weren't like they are now. It could take you 4 hours to go to Cork, or 5. In that era, I'm talking about the early 60s and 50s. So the travel was and if you were playing a league match in Cork, you mightn't be home till 3 or 4 in the morning, because you'd be getting a bit of a meal after, maybe some of the boys would be getting a pint or two. I'm not talking about a session, but and then there was a 4-hour journey, and maybe a 5-hour journey to Cork. And overnight stays weren't the big thing. The thing I enjoyed most about it, one of the things, was we got a chance to go to play in Wembley Stadium. That was a big exciting thing in 1967, 68 for us, because I think it was the first time I was in an aeroplane. Well, it was that in 1967, and then Wembley, the dressing rooms, and how plush and how big they were, and the showers and all that in them. They weren't what was in Ireland at the time.
It was different to what might have been in a farmer's field in...
Oh, it was different to what was in... Different to what was even in Croke Park at the time.
Right.
Yeah.
And you just mentioned the games in Wembley there. That was part of an exhibition format, was it?
Yeah, and it ran for years. It was part of and it was on Whit Weekend. It was on every Whit Weekend. Now, I'm not sure how it was selected, whether it was the All-Ireland champions for the year before or the league winners were selected. But the twice we played Cork in it, in 67 and 68. And there'd be about maybe 35 or 40,000 Irish people. A lot of Irish people working in England at the time. And particularly Wexford. Wexford, even in an Oireachtas, I played in a couple of Oireachtas finals. I think there could have been 40,000, which is unbelievable in Croke Park for an Oireachtas, a competition that's very little thought about today. But that time it was a big competition.
I suppose important aspects of any big game are how players handle the build-up, and then hopefully there'll be celebrations afterwards. Could you tell us a little bit about both of those?
Well, certainly in the build-up to All Ireland, in the build-up to it, you're excited, it's not too bad, but coming up to the day of it, you are under, and I think any player tells you this, you are under pressure. Maybe you'll be thinking you're going to make a mistake or you're going to do something. But I think players in Wexford are particularly lucky. And I'm 80 years of age now, and I am saying this sincerely, and maybe it's something you'd expect me to say, but I'm not saying it. The Wexford supporters are the most generous supporters out there. They'll never criticise you, or that, so long as you do your best. Now, if you don't try, or if you draw back, or any of those things, they won't be long about spotting. But if you do your best, okay, whoever you're playing on is faster than you, or that. But if you just don't turn around and stay there, if you presume, if you don't think, and I think Wexford supporters, and I think they're recognised for too, are the most generous. So that takes a certain amount of pressure off you then. Of course, then when you win it, you're delighted, and I was delighted to win an All-Ireland. But I came back after the 65 All-Ireland, which they lost. Now, I'm not saying there was the same amount of Wexford supporters. Enniscorthy was the place for me. I'm an Enniscorthy fella. But there was as many supporters in the Market Square, nearly as much.
The
year we didn't win, in 65. Yeah. So that's why I'm saying they're very generous. They'll still come out and support you. You know, I know they'll analyse the match and maybe point out to you. And I find that too, in a nice way, you might have done that, or you should. And maybe they're right. Maybe that's what you should have done. But you haven't much time to think about it.
Yeah. What are your memories of the final day itself? It must be a very special thing to play in an All-Ireland final.
Well, for me it was. Having waited for, I was 29 at the time, having waited, and I knew it was coming here. But I suppose the memories of the first half was I thought the ball had never go up towards the Tipperary goal because it kept coming in. You think it was never going in, and we were under fierce pressure. But, well, we were...
I think, just sorry to interrupt, yeah. I think having watched that game, I think is one of the greatest exhibitions of centre-back play by Mick Roche in that game.
Yes,
I think, in the first half.
Yeah. But where was the consequence of that? Only coming down on the full back line because every ball he got, which must have been 20, he was bypassing the Wexford half back line and he was dropping them between the half, and that's a confusing state. But then that Wexford team, whereas I don't know how people rate teams, and I think you really can't. But when you look at some of the people, and all the lads gave 110%, but there were some exceptional players on it. I don't think you could get a goalman as cool and as calm as Pat Nolan. And that kind of came out into the players. And he'd give you a piece of advice without shouting at you or that.
Yeah.
And you had Dan Quigley, Willie Murphy, Tom Neville, Phil Wilson, Tony Dorn, Pauline. I'm not, certainly all those lads are friends of mine, and I suppose there's be a time for me to mention 3 of them are not here today. Tom Neville, who died recently, and Jack Berry, who was the first of us that passed away, and Paul Lynch. I suppose my thoughts turned to those two on occasion. But we were a good team, as the team should play, if you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
There mightn't have been a team of all-stars, but we were a good blend, and that was it. And I think Ned Power and Podge Keogh were able to exploit that as well.
You just mentioned Podge Keogh there. He was the manager of the team?
Podge was the manager.
Were there any other selectors with him, or was there?
There was. Nicky Rackard was the selector. Tom Donoghue from Buffer's Alley was a selector. Sil Barn from Rathnure was a selector. Now, there was 2 selectors from Rathnewer, and I just tell you how maybe fair things were. There wasn't 10 Rathnewer players on it. There wasn't that many at all, even though they had 2 selectors, and I suppose they could have used their influence, but they didn't. The feeling got through the team they were going to pick the best players on.
Regardless.
Yeah, and that's an important thing.
Yeah.
That's an important thing in any team.
So you went in at half time 8 points down to Tipperary. What could you say, or what was said at half time to make the changes that were made?
Well, I suppose I won't say exactly what was said, but and Podge was dead, God be merciful to him, but he wouldn't be known to be a politician or a diplomat. Whatever he had to say, he kind of said it, and sometimes in colourful language that I won't repeat for there. But I tell you, one of the things he said, you think you're hurlers and you're reading on the paper how good you are. Did you think of looking at the scoreboard and you coming in? That was the mild part of it.
Right.
That was the mild part of it. So I don't think we needed much galvanising because we weren't too happy with ourselves either. But that was the and he cleared everyone out, so it was the players were getting, and maybe what he was saying was a bit true as well.
And it was only earlier in the day that the Miners won the All-Ireland just before.
And the Camogie people.
And the Camogie won that year as well.
And sure, we all thought, and I'm sure every Wexford supporter there thought that, well, we're on a roll now, Wexford will win. Sure, it took another 26 years for us to win an All-Ireland. I think it was 1996 after that.
I suppose the 21 or 22 years between 55 and 76 or 7 were really the golden age for Wexford hurling, you could say, weren't they?
They were near enough they were in an All-Ireland, whether they won it or lost it nearly every second year.
Yeah.
And then people become used to that and think it can never, but it just tells you it can stop, and it has to be worked on, and it has to be, but hopefully we'll be there this year. We're not going too badly.
Hopefully so. Unfortunately, hurling didn't continue very long after 1968 All-Ireland final for you, Eddie, due to injury.
No, it only continued to the league semi-final in 1969, and I injured my knee, and it had happened a lot of times. I was coming up to 30 and I thought long and hard about it, and I retired. I wasn't sorry for retiring because I whether I'd been able to continue on or not, because at that level, at intercounty level, you have to be fit, you have to be, whereas your colleagues will give you a hand if you're not really able to manage who you're playing on, and oftentimes that had happened. They're so tied up with their own, they're not able to give you the same.
Yeah,
so Croke Park can be a big place when you're being outclassed.
And we talked a little bit at the start there about your football days. You're fortunate enough to play in an All-Ireland football final for Wexford.
I was, yeah. In 1963, the Wexford junior football team went to the All-Ireland final, and we played Kerry. And we were only beaten by a couple of points. Well, that's no good. We didn't win it, but we might have won it. But initially, I think I mentioned at the start of your interview that in the CBS, football was the game, and football was something that came more natural to me than hurling. A lot of people that tell you that, well, they're not around now. Anyone saw me playing football, but football came far more easier to me than the hurling did. But I had to stop playing football in 1960. That was the last time I played, in 1963. After that, I never played any more football after that. Even though I was quite young, I wasn't up. My knees weren't up to it,
Yeah.
So I stopped after that, and I haven't stayed up to that. I played in 5 Wexford football finals and won none of it.
You also mentioned at the start of the interview that you would have started playing handball locally, but you were also successful nationally as well at handball. Yeah,
I suppose it was fortunate. Yeah, it was a centenary year. The GAA, Liam Swan and myself, we competed in the over 40s All-Ireland final again against Kerry, but we lost that. But I have an All-Ireland team championship with the Stardust Club. We won the club championship around that. I'm not sure the year, but around 1982 or 3. So handball became a big part of my life then, and I played that on for a long time. It's a lovely game because you can play at any age. And I was lucky too because the handball alley was near the CBS. When in my career then there was a handball alley in the hospital. So obviously if the facilities are close to you, you're going to use them, and that's how my interest in handball developed. In fact, it's not noticed, but Wexford has a proud record in handball in terms of All-Irelands won and club championships won. John Ryan, people that have forgotten him, and John Doyle, they won All-Ireland after All-Ireland in that era. And Ned Buggy, Ned, everyone knows Ned, and his brother were extraordinarily good handballers. And Dick Ling and Ballian won All-Ireland. Wexford has quite a high reputation in handball.
I suppose, I'd say if you listed off the number of people who played in an All-Ireland hurling final, an All-Ireland football final and an All-Ireland handball final, the list wouldn't be terribly long.
I think it mightn't be, Peter. It mightn't be long, but that's not to say that you're any better than anyone else. It fell into me. It fell for me that was the case, you know. And now I think Ted Morrissey. I'm not quite sure he played in All-Ireland final, but as I say, handball was a big thing in Wexford. But I was lucky to play in the three of them.
Yeah, and just we mentioned earlier about the preparation when you were in 1967 and 68. How do you feel about the way things are going now in terms of the way players are becoming far more focused and professionalised nearly?
Yeah, and I think myself that I'm not in favour of pay for play. I wouldn't see it maybe succeeding, because a lot of people like yourself and other people give so much of their time and talents generously to promoting the games, whether it's the junior B football team, it's the camogie team or whatever. And if you start paying people, it's going to be hard to regulate it. Maybe it can be done, I don't know. But I would think that in terms of some kind of reward to players, and we'll take the Wexford football team, and we're not going quite as well at that as we were. But the lads playing football for Wexford put in a big effort. And at the end of the year, I'd feel the panel deserves some kind of reward. And I'm talking about a monetary reward from the GAA and to the panel, and let them do what they like with it. Let them go on a holiday, let them donate it to charity. Now, again, I'm not talking about pay for play, but I think if you put in the whole year or 6 months, and it's I'm not saying you give up your life, you enjoy it, you certainly don't give up your life, but you do put a tremendous effort in.
There's a very big commitment.
It's a very big commitment. And there's a commitment from everyone on the panel. It's from the selectors, the trainer, the masseur, the fellas keep you fit, the fellas look after the jerseys. When I'm talking about the panel, I'm including more than the players. I know you could say, well, I think here in Wexford, I'm not quite sure this, so I can be careful that the county secretary maybe receives remuneration because it's a big job now to run the county, to run the county board. But a lot of club secretaries and all that don't, and they're I think without a successful club secretary and club chairman, it's going to be impossible for a club to succeed because they have to fundraise, insurance. There's a whole lot of things now that weren't. I trained in farmers' fields. Yeah. And you go to the farmer's field and you train, and someone in that time might twist their ankle, might break their leg, but there's no litigation involved. Now that's all changed. Even if you were a farmer and you had a field, you'd be afraid to let a team train because if something happened, the consequences might come back on you. So things have changed.
Yeah, certainly have, yeah.
But I'd have to say, in terms of the GAA, what I'd like to see happening, and peculiar enough, before you came over this evening, I was reading a book written by a very unusual person, Sister Stanislaus Kennedy, and she wouldn't think she'd write very much about the GAA, but she did put an article in a GAA book, and she was critical of the GAA for one thing only. She was saying, now Wexford won an All-Ireland, Kilkenny win them, Dublin win them, and that's great for the people that win them. And it probably does drive the GAA on. But what about the player that's never good enough, that the best he or she can achieve is beyond their junior football team, maybe the B team or the C team? They should have an equal place in the GAA. But I think Wexford GAA is succeeding in that. And I am saying that you go to school or pass through Kilteely, Monaghy or Oilgate, any village, and the kids going to school, you will see a lot of them bringing hurls along.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of leagues, and there is a lot of activity and coaching for younger people. So I think the success at GA in Wexford should be measured by that rather than what all Ireland's doing. Now, I'd love if we won the hurling next year and the football as well, but the success of it is many people go, and many people, and I think Wexford County Board and often do get criticism, like are doing certainly a good job
At promoting the game.
Promoting the game.
I think it's very fair to say. I also just mentioned, we're nearly wrap it up now, but a lot of us would go to matches in Patrick's Park regularly, but you were actually involved in the development of Patrick's Park.
I was, and I'm proud of that. When I was going to school, we used to go up from CBS up to Patrick's Park, and that time diggers and bulldozers weren't. We were the diggers and bulldozers that day, moving rocks and moving that. And again, it was an initiative of the boys' club, Father Scallon, that we talked about originally. He developed that park from nothing, you could say. And it's a very useful asset to the GA today, but it was a community effort. And I think that's what the GA is about, really. And it's something I often look back when I walk into it myself. I'd say, maybe I moved that stone there, or I shoveled a bit of clay there. But then there was 50 or 60 of us had. It was a fun thing for us, really.
Yeah,
we didn't, and so we were out of school as well, which was
that's always a good reason to do
It's
anything.
always a good reason.
Well, look, Eddie, thanks very much for your time. I think the viewers will find what you've had to say about your life in the GA very interesting, and thanks very much for inviting us here today.
Thanks for having me on, Peter.